Iraq has tainted, painted, and infected a number of things I do. You're never sure how it's going to reappear. I had been frustrated as a Marine in Iraq, a very complicated war, and I just invaded the country and been there for 7 months. So my return, I think, brought back a little bit of that energy, negative or otherwise. But I was drawn to conflict. I was drawn to confront that side of me. It was an urge that I had since I was very little. Many boys are drawn that way. I don't know if we're just wired for that. I think there's something genetic in our attraction to war. It certainly has been reinforced with film and lore. It's been romanticized. Even every attempt to make it as despicable as possible seems to make it that much more attractive in some ways. And no matter how wise you are in your approach to it, there's a certain intrigue to the adventure of absolute risk. And I also had a very deep-seated need to serve my country. And I thought that although I might have done better with the Peace Corps, that the Marine Corps was sort of my destiny. And it was great to talk to Phil Caputo, who also had a very frustrating war and remembers it very well, as many of those veterans do. His return home was far different than mine. I returned to essentially complacency. No one really cared, but they weren't angry at me. When Phil returned, he was targeted specifically with a tremendous anger, as if he had created the war in Vietnam, when of course we'd all been sent. So we had very different experiences returning home, but our experience in war, although he in a jungle and I in a desert, were similar in many ways. It was a very structureless war. It was not backed by the nation that had sent us in many ways. Initially ours, the invasion of Iraq, was generally supported, but very quickly that eroded. And eroded while we were actually there. And before my second tour, I returned in 2005 to what was essentially a completely unpopular war and a much worse area. My first tour was into the Shia section to the east, and then my second tour was in the Sunni section to the west near Fallujah, the city of Ramadi. So even my experiences in that war were dramatically different from one time to another. But he wrote A Rumor of War, which is something that pretty much all Marines read as part of their real introduction to that military life, and also what it's like to deal with a war from the inside. It's a very confessional piece. It's also unapologetic, and it's just a tremendous book. So being able to talk with him just over lunch was a fascinating experience. The arts have embraced many of the Iraq, Afghanistan veterans immediately. There's more memoirs now about those two conflicts than there probably are about World War II and Korea and Vietnam combined, and we're not even out of it yet, if you can ever get out of this kind of thing. Generation Kill is a 7-part miniseries on HBO about the invasion of Iraq by a Marine recon unit, a unit that went in just a few weeks prior to me. We were late in arriving, and was an embedded reporter. So it's his version of the world, and then it's been reimagined through screenwriters, and then reimagined through directors, and reimagined through actors and editors. So it's a stencil of the truth by the time you see any of it. But it was an interesting thing to be part of, because I had only been back from Iraq on my second tour for 2 years when I ended up in Africa recreating the Iraq War invasion. And it was actually interesting because we were standing in an empty street, which was a complete facade. It was just walls, and the facade of a building at the end. And I had all my photographs of the invasion. The very same path that Marine Recon took, I ended up taking just a little later than that. And they had gone in when it was still embroiled. Still, every town was still a battle. And both Eric Cucker, who was actually in that unit, and one of the characters in the show, who was the military advisor, now as a consultant, and playing a minor character as the executive officer of the battalion, were standing in the middle of the street. And there were extras running around with AK-47s, Iraqis, extras, and it was an empty street with the fake sewage and all the hanging wires, and it looked about as real as any Iraqi town I'd ever been through. But we were all alone kind of on the set with all these Iraqis running around with rifles. And I just remember the two of us kind of looking at each other like, man, we need to take some cover. We just had that feeling all over again of being back in that place and that time. So that was interesting, kind of revisiting that world just 2 years after having been there, while the conflict was actually still going on.